Hello, History 363. So today we're going to be discussing Roman imperialism in the West after 200 BC. Indeed, so far all of our focus, somewhat because of Polybius, has really focused on the Greek East. But it's really in the West, particularly in Spain, that Rome develops a program for governing, administrating, and systematically exploiting overseas provinces. Note that so far, Rome has no provinces in the East. That is, there is no part of the East that is under permanent Roman military occupation. Every single war we've looked at, the First Macedonian War, the Second Macedonian War, the Syrian War, the Third Macedonian War, the Roman troops have all come home, leaving no soldiers and no administrators in the East. Now, in 200 BC, there are still Roman armies in Spain. And of course, if we remember back to the Second Punic War, the Romans had gone to Spain primarily to push the Carthaginians out, because Spain had been such an important power base for the sort of Barcid version of the Carthaginian Empire. Spain provided military manpower, and Spain also had silver. So the main reason the Romans were going to Spain is just to deny those resources to the Carthaginians. That being said, they decide to stay after 201 BC, maybe much to the chagrin of some Iberian and Celtiberian peoples who had worked with the Romans, maybe under the hope that someone like Titus Flamininus would stand up and say, freedom for the Iberians. But that's not to be. Now, down into 197, the Romans continue sending imperatores sine magistratu. That is men who have imperium, proconsular imperium, but don't hold a formal magisterial office or aren't formal pro-magistrates. Just like young Scipio, the future Africanus, who had been sent in 209. He had proconsular imperium, but he'd never been a praetor or a consul. It seems the Romans sort of continue the idea of Spain being a site of extraordinary commands outside of the kind of normal cursus honorum of praetors and consuls, pro-praetors and proconsuls. This changes in 197 BC. And indeed, 197, this is an important year for the way the Romans think about provinces. So up till now, to be assigned a province is not like a province that is a well-defined administrative space. Prior to 197 BC, a Roman province is much more akin to a military area of operation. A provincia is the area that a magistrate or pro-magistrate with imperium is authorized to exercise his imperium by the Senate. So the Senate decides what the provinces are going to be. And again, they're areas of operations. In some instances, they're just a place where we have a military problem. So Macedonia can be a province, but then the war ends and the next year it's not a province. Cisalpine Gaul can be a province. And then the next year it ends and it's not a province, although there's a lot of fighting in Cisalpine Gaul. But these provinces shift year to year as the military needs change. And so if you're a consul, once you go to your province, even though you're the consul, you can't exercise your imperium everywhere else. You can't go into somebody else's province and say, well, I'm the consul, I'm taking charge. Nope, even as a consul, the exercise of your imperium is bounded by the area of operations the Senate has assigned to you. At times, it is true, if there's a need, the Senate can shift provinces around, give consuls or proconsuls or anyone else permission to shift to a different province, say, to reinforce someone else. But by and large, this is a way of actually keeping magistrates or pro-magistrates sent abroad, keeping them in their own place so that they're not meddling around in some other area of operation. So this is what the province up till about 197. In fact, if I had to translate it, I would almost translate it not as modern province, but as area of operations, to borrow a contemporary military term. This somewhat changes in 197 BC, because what the Senate decides to do in 197 is to say that from here on out, there will be two permanent provinces in Spain. That is, there won't have to be further debate of should we make Spain a province or two provinces. No, there will be two provinces in Spain. Hispania Citerior, nearer Spain, and Hispania Ulterior, further Spain. And every year we will plan to dispatch praetors to govern those Spanish provinces. In some instances, pro-praetors also govern them. But the two Spains are now going to be permanent praetorian provinces. And I should note, as an interesting note, all of those praetors actually are given proconsular imperium. Oddity of sort of Roman administrative state terminology. But they're praetorian provinces. Now, occasionally, consuls will go there as well. They can be given to a consul if there's a really serious war. Cato the Elder, for example, is dispatched to Hispania Citerior. But there are always going to be provinces. That doesn't even need to be debated. So these are the first permanent provinces of the Roman small e empire. Rather than just be a shifting set of tasks, assignments, AOs, they are now kind of territorially bounded areas. They're starting to become much more of what we assume the word province means, and even evolving towards what, say, the word province will mean, say, in the early Roman Empire. So this is actually, sounds small and technical, this is actually a big step for how the Romans bound imperial space. Now, when I say that these are sort of permanent and established provinces, one important thing I should note, they don't have a boundary inland. So in some ways, these provinces are actually considered open frontiers in the sense that the Roman governors are authorized to continue pursuing warfare further and further inland. There is a general boundary, though, of where one kind of a dividing line of where the governor of Citerior shouldn't cross into Ulterior and vice versa. Now, this sort of begs the question, what do the Romans want from Spain? They don't really need the military manpower, although they will use Iberian and Celtiberian auxiliaries to augment their armies in Spain. The silver is obviously nice. One thing about this silver, the Romans don't seem to be initially all that interested in mining it. Indeed, it doesn't seem that there are really concentrated, organized mining operations until the late 2nd century BC. Possibly we can find something new, but that's kind of what our archaeology tells us. Also, what the mix of silver in Roman coins tells us, that they don't really start being dominated by Iberian silver isotopes, which are regionally specific, until the later 2nd century BC. They do, however, look forward to silver coming from Spain in the form of loot. And indeed, I think we might almost say that for the Roman Republic, warfare is almost a resource, namely to the senatorial elite. Because if you are a young man coming up the cursus honorum and you've finally been elected praetor, to get a command in one of the Spanish provinces is a chance to distinguish yourself militarily, a chance to bring back loot, a chance to distribute that loot to soldiers who are future voters. And so in some ways, you might say the Roman senatorial aristocracy, one reason they may stick in Spain is precisely because it provides the opportunities for warfare, military competition that helps feed into the Roman political system, particularly now that the routine opportunities for warfare that had dominated, for the Second Punic War, there's plenty of war to go around. And now at the end of that, a whole new generation of Roman aristocrats has to find a way to distinguish themselves in a culture that has come to value military accomplishment somewhat above all other things, although Roman aristocrats do value other things besides military accomplishment. I would also say that there's a bit of a Goldilocks aspect to the kind of warfare that the Romans want to drive their political system. A big war, a war like a war against Macedonia or the Seleucid Empire or Carthage even, is tremendously disruptive because it doesn't just create aristocrats who are winners. It creates aristocrats who are head and shoulders above everybody else because of the splendor of their victory. And that's actually really disruptive to the Roman political elite, to have one guy just lording over everybody else because, like, hey, who of you beat Hannibal? And in fact, Scipio Africanus is a really good example of this. He's a really disruptive guy. He's a brilliant military genius. But the fact that he has beaten Hannibal and can claim a military glory that no one else can really puts him, it makes the Roman elite tremendously suspicious of him. And indeed, it's notable that in the 180s, Scipio is accused of financial crimes, embezzlement. These seem to be, it's unclear how guilty he is, although almost every Roman aristocrat is skimming off the top. But he goes into a self-imposed exile. And I would say that the bigger issue behind this so-called trial of the Scipios, which includes his brother, the victor over Antiochus the Great, also the kind of splendid victory that most Roman aristocrats don't have access to. I suspect that this is more about the fact that their military laurels are so high above everyone else that it's disruptive and potentially dangerous for the nature of this senatorial aristocratic political class. So it's notable that the Romans are really hesitant to engage in Eastern wars. They do so only when actually kind of exceptional dangers present themselves. And I think that may be because the fact that these wars will produce one splendid victor, like Titus Flamininus or Aemilius Paulus or Scipio Africanus or Lucius Scipio, that it makes people wary of entering into them, because you're going to create a political superstar who can overshadow everyone else. Not so wars in Spain. The wars in Spain are mostly small. They do involve regular engagements. The Iberians, oftentimes the wars in Spain are called guerrilla wars, but it actually seems the Iberians frequently, when they confront the Romans, will get together coalitions and will form organized armies that line up and oftentimes fight set-piece battles. But there's still nothing compared to the armies of Macedonia or Carthage or the Seleucid Empire. So scoring a military victory over the Iberians is good enough that it gives Roman aristocrats political capital. It allows them to bring loot back. It allows them to have a triumph. But in many instances, these guys are praetors. They're not yet consuls even. And the victory isn't so splendid that, again, it kind of causes them to outshine everyone else. It's the just right kind of warfare. And there's an infinite, or seemingly infinite, amount of this. Because once you bash one Iberian tribe, you can bash the next one the hill over, and the next one the hill over. So in a way, I would actually argue that warfare in Spain, just the right amount of warfare that wins laurels, but there's plenty of laurels to go around for the aristocracy, may be one reason why the Romans are so committed to Spain and not anywhere else. Now, the fact that this warfare is also probably somewhat profitable, at least to those involved, the commanders and the soldiers, because there is enough silver that you can loot, let someone else mine it, and then you just loot it from them. Maybe another reason that the Romans focus here rather than in other peripheries. And I should note, there is one other periphery where they're also laser focused, and I've said this before, it's Cisalpine Gaul. And here I don't necessarily think it's because of the triumph so much, although a number of triumphs come out of Cisalpine Gaul and Liguria. Here I think it's the land. That is a resource that is incredibly valuable to the Romans. So anyway, the Romans are in Spain, and this also means that there is going to be heavy fighting in Spain, in part because the Romans keep instigating violence themselves. There's obviously some violence, we might say, that the Iberians instigate. These are societies, the Iberian and Celtiberian society, in many instances, are still warrior-based societies, where success in various raids is how you define yourself as a man and a leader in your society. And so the Iberians are more than happy to raid into the more settled parts of Roman provinces, and that can spark violence. But the Romans themselves seem to constantly pick fights and then follow up ferociously. This is if you buy at least part of Harris's thesis, I would say it's definitely true in Spain. It may not be true in the East, but it's true in Spain. The levels of warfare wax and wane. There's particularly fierce fighting down to around 179 BC, when a successful Roman praetor named Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus, keep that name in mind, manages to produce a settlement that seems to actually regularize a number of extractions and tamps down some kind of routine grievances of various Iberian groups. And this leads to, it seems, a relative peace in Spain for a while. That being said, warfare resumes again heavily in both Spains in around 153 BC. And this is, there's really kind of two focuses in ulterior, the warfare is heavily driven by eventually the Lusitanians and a Lusitanian rebel named Viriathus. Now, Viriathus is himself a survivor of one of the most despicable massacres that the Romans perpetrate in Spain. Namely, there is a commander, Sulpicius Galba. He is once looped, and therefore several groups of Lusitanians surrender to him. He orders them to come down, surrender their arms, and basically he's going to say, well, we're going to move to Portugal, we're going to move you to a different place. This is actually, empires do this a lot, take people and move them from one place that's maybe more defensible and move them to another place that's less defensible. The Iberians say, okay, Lusitanians say, okay, we've surrendered, we'll do this. Galba that night digs a trench around their camp and then goes in with his soldiers the next day and kills every man, woman, and child, basically in order to take their stuff. So a massacre that is essentially grand theft on a huge scale. A few survivors escape. One of them is a young man named Viriathus, and he very quickly develops as a ferocious leader. Again, we might call him a kind of guerrilla leader, but he's a ferocious leader of Lusitanian resistance in Spain. The Romans, he manages to defeat a number of Roman armies, it seems in some instances in more open military engagements, although our sources are really bad at this point. And is finally killed not in battle, but through treachery. So that is one locus. The other locus is Numantia, a town up in Citerior on a navigable river. And the Numantines are particularly, the Dueros River. So the Numantines are on the Dueros River, a strategic kind of choke point. If you're trying to go through the Dueros River Valley. And because of this strategic choke point, they frustrate Roman attempts to subdue them. So we have this wars raging from 153 onwards. Let me actually go back to Sulpicius Galba. Sulpicius Galba's massacre is so horrific that the Romans themselves are appalled. And it takes a lot to make the Romans appalled at a war crime. And they put Sulpicius on trial. This would be a trial probably before the Roman assembly. And Sulpicius, who's guilty as sin, everyone knows it, the way he gets off is he puts on mourning clothes, he dresses his children in mourning clothes, and he has his children weep and wail, saying, oh, don't condemn our father, don't take our father away. I mean, this is someone who's ordered the murder of children and wives and fathers and mothers. But it works for the assembly. He is acquitted. And this angers a lot of people, that someone so guilty could get away. And what they therefore do is create a new type of court, a standing court, de repetundis, for provincial malfeasance. And this court is going to it's not going to be like the courts where you sort of are tried before the Roman assembly. This court is going to have a jury of senators, and anyone who is accused of provincial malfeasance can be dragged before this standing court, which means it's always going to be there. There have been some instances of temporary courts that are set up to try a particular case, but the court de repetundis is now going to be permanent. And so this is actually another big development in Roman provincial law. There are so many Roman administrators going out, particularly in Spain, but also elsewhere, engaging in malfeasance. This malfeasance actually has a corrosive effect on Roman administration. If provincials are being robbed and suffering misadministration or maladministration. So now there's a standing court that will at least attempt to remedy some of these cases, although its efficacy is somewhat doubtful. But nonetheless, that's a development that comes from this horrifying massacre. As for Sulpicius Galba, sad ending if you care about villains getting their comeuppance. He goes on and is elected consul and has a perfectly fine senatorial career. So he doesn't pay for, again, what is, again, a war crime even by the Romans' own low standards. At any rate, this violence continues in Spain up until 133 BC, when the Romans finally, having suffered a series of defeats against Numantia, and indeed one defeat in 138 is particularly notable, namely that an army commanded by a guy named Hostilius Mancinus is surrounded and forced to surrender, and the terms of them being released is that a treaty is concluded that guarantees Numantia's independence. And this treaty is negotiated by a young quaestor named Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus, the son of our Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus, who was the praetor in 178 BC. And indeed, one reason the Numantines are willing to work with him is they remember what a great guy his father was. So this Roman army comes home having essentially disgraced itself, and the Senate debates what to do, because there are senators that this treaty is shameful, and there's talk of basically saying, you know what, we're going to abrogate the treaty, and since the army was released because they signed this treaty, we're going to send at least some of the command staff back to the Numantines. They can do with them what they will. Now, it's finally decided that everyone but Hostilius Mancinus will be spared this fate, including Tiberius Gracchus, who some people blame for actually putting together this treaty. So Hostilius Mancinus is sent back to Numantia. Numantines are probably gobsmacked when they go and see the Romans bringing up a former consul. They strip him naked, they bind him up, and they say, you guys take him, we don't want him anymore. Now, here the Numantines are more decent, I would say, than the Romans expect them to be. They're not sure what to do, and they just, untie poor Hostilius and send him home. And indeed, he subsequently runs for praetor again and re-enters the Senate. So this peace treaty is, however, done. In 134, the Romans decided they were going to send their best general, Scipio Aemilianus. And Scipio Aemilianus, I think I'm going to do another lecture on the Third Punic War, because we've covered a lot of ground. But Scipio Aemilianus is the consul who had won the Third Punic War and razed Carthage to the ground. We'll do another short lecture, say tomorrow. But he's widely considered Rome's best general. He is the son of Aemilius Paulus. He is the adoptive grandson of Scipio Africanus. And of course, we've met him many times before as the good friend of Polybius. Scipio Aemilianus comes with an army, surrounds Numantia with siege works, and by 133 forces the city to surrender, and it's reduced. The city is razed to the ground, its population is sold into slavery, and Numantia is a wasteland. However, between the defeat of Viriathus and the subsequent destruction of Numantia, this really ends a lot of the major warfare in Spain, although there will continue to be fighting in Spain into the early empire, although usually in the more rugged and mountainous regions in the far, far west of Spain. Nonetheless, we now have in the Spains two permanent provinces, and in some ways a shift to how Rome thinks about administrating and exploiting its empire. It's notable that in the late 2nd century, that is somewhat after the Romans' victories in sort of both Spains, against the Lusitanians and against the Numantines, that's when we actually start to see systematic Roman exploitation of the mines. That as things become more peaceful, the Romans now start to look to how to exploit the mineral resources, which of course are quite bountiful in both provinces of Spain. All right, I think I'll stop there for now. We really ended up focusing just on Spain, but next time we'll talk about the bizarre case and tragic case of the Third Punic War, in which the Romans decide for very few good or honorable reasons to destroy the city of Carthage. So I'll see you soon.